Alright, let's go. When you picture a prehistoric human, you probably imagine a hairy figure hunched in a cave, grunting, dragging a club, barely smarter than an animal. Forget that picture completely. The people who lived in the Stone Age were exactly as intelligent as you are. They had the same brains, the same feelings, the same restless curiosity about the world. But they lived in a reality so different from ours that the things they did every single day would look utterly bizarre to modern eyes. They built their homes out of the bones of giants. They drilled holes into the skulls of living people and watched them recover. They painted their bodies a deep blood red, filed their front teeth into sharp points, and in some cases, they carefully ate their own dead and drank from their skulls. And here is the thing you have to understand. None of this was random, and almost none of it was madness. Every strange habit on this list had a reason behind it, a logic that made perfect sense in their world, even when it makes us flinch in ours. The deeper you dig into why they did these things, the less alien they seem, and the more clearly you see ordinary people trying to make sense of life and death with the tools and ideas they had. In this video, we are counting down 10 of the strangest ways prehistoric people actually lived, from number 10 all the way down to number 1. Some of these will make you smile, some will make you wince and look away, and a few of them might genuinely change the way you think about what it means to be a human being. So take a breath and step back with me, tens of thousands of years into a world that was far stranger and far more familiar than you could ever imagine. Number 10. They lived in houses made of mammoth bones. Picture the frozen plains of Ice Age Europe. A flat, endless, white landscape with no forests for hundreds of miles in any direction, no trees to cut down, no wood to build with, and a wind so cold it could kill an unprotected person in a matter of hours. Now picture a low dome rising out of the snow, built entirely from enormous curved bones, pale against the gray sky. This was not a monster's lair or a burial mound. It was a house, a real home, and families lived their whole lives inside structures exactly like. With no timber available, the humans of the Ice Age turned to the one building material they had in abundance, the remains of the mammoths they hunted and scavenged across the tundra. Archaeologists have uncovered the foundations of these strange dwellings at many sites across Eastern Europe, and the scale of them is genuinely breathtaking. A single hut could be constructed from the bones of dozens of individual mammoths. Great curved tusks were arched over the doorway to form a grand entrance. Heavy skulls were set into the ground to anchor the base of the walls. Lower jaws were stacked and slotted together in careful, deliberate herringbone patterns, interlocking like enormous bricks, and the whole frame was then draped with heavy animal hides to seal out the wind and the cold. One famous structure was built using nearly 150 mammoth jaws and tusks in its walls alone. Now stop and think about the sheer effort that took. Each of those bones weighed as much as a grown person, and many of them had to be dragged across the frozen ground from far away, then lifted and fitted into place entirely by hand, without machines, without metal, without even the help of wheels. These were not flimsy shelters thrown up for a single night. They were solid, permanent homes, returned to season after season, with fireplaces burning inside, where families cooked their meals, slept under furs, and told their stories through the long, dark, freezing winters. Some researchers believe the largest of these bone structures may have carried a deeper meaning as well, almost like monuments or sacred buildings, raised from the very animals that kept the whole community alive. To us, the idea of a house built from skulls and tusks sounds like something out of a nightmare. To the people who built them, it was simply home, warm and safe and dry, a small circle of life and firelight in an endless world of ice. And believe me, It is only the first of the strange ways these people lived. Number 9. They hunted by running their prey to death. Let's be honest about something. Humans are not fast. A deer can outrun us without effort. A horse can outrun us. A frightened antelope can leave us standing as if we were not even moving. Almost every animal our ancestors ever wanted to eat could beat us in a flat-out sprint, easily. So how did early humans, armed for most of our history with nothing but simple wooden spears and no bows at all, manage to bring down swift, powerful, terrified prey? The answer is one of the strangest and most quietly brilliant strategies in the entire natural world. They did not try to outrun their prey. They outlasted it. The technique is called persistence hunting, and it works like this. A small group of hunters chooses one single animal from a herd, and then they simply begin to follow it, on foot, at a slow, steady, tireless jog. The animal panics and bolts, exploding away at full speed and vanishing over the horizon within seconds. But the hunters do not chase, and they do not stop. They keep moving at their patient pace, reading the ground, following the tracks and the broken grass. And after a few minutes, they find the animal again, standing still, trying to catch its breath. So it bolts a second time. And again, calmly, relentlessly, the hunters come. Here is the secret that makes it all work. Most large, furry animals cannot sweat the way we do. They shed heat by panting, and crucially, an animal cannot pant properly and gallop at full speed at the same time for very long. Humans are different. We are nearly hairless. We walk upright, so the sun strikes only a small part of our bodies, and our skin is covered in millions of sweat glands that cool us as we move. We are, quite simply, among the finest long-distance endurance machines that nature has ever produced. So hour after hour, through the hottest part of the day, the hunters keep up their relentless, unhurried pressure, never once letting the animal stand still long enough to cool itself down. The prey grows hotter and slower. Eventually its body temperature climbs to a fatal level. Its legs buckle beneath it, and it simply collapses, helpless and overheated, while the hunters walk calmly up and finish the kill. This is how people fed themselves for hundreds of thousands of years, and a handful of communities around the world still hunt this way today. Imagine the patience, the discipline, and the raw toughness it takes to pursue an animal for 5 or 6 hours under a blazing sun, never speeding up, never giving up, until it can no longer run. It is a powerful reminder that our greatest weapon was never our speed, and never our strength. It was our endurance, and our absolute refusal to quit. Number 8. They ate dirt on purpose. This one sounds at first like either a mistake or an act of pure desperation, but it was neither. All across the prehistoric world, and in many places right up to the present day, people have deliberately and regularly eaten earth. Not by accident, not because they were starving and had nothing else, but as a normal, intentional, and genuinely useful part of their everyday diet. The practice is so widespread that it even has a formal name. It is called geophagy, the eating of soil, and it is far older and far more common across human history than almost anyone realizes. Now, your instinct is probably that swallowing dirt could only ever make a person sick, but the people who did this were not grabbing random handfuls of filthy ground. They were carefully selecting very specific types of earth, usually a soft, clean, pale clay, dug from particular trusted locations that were known, valued, and sometimes even traded over long distances. And that special clay did something genuinely remarkable inside the body. Many of the wild plants that prehistoric people depended on, the roots, the seeds, the bitter leaves and tubers, are loaded with natural poisons and harsh chemicals, Defenses the plants evolved specifically to stop animals from eating them. When a person swallows a small amount of the right kind of clay along with that risky food, the clay acts like a sponge, binding tightly to those toxins and carrying them safely out of the body before they can do any harm. On top of that, the clay can calm an upset and churning stomach, and it can add precious minerals like iron and calcium into a diet that was often desperately short of them. In other words, these people had stumbled upon and perfected a kind of natural medicine, thousands of years before any human being understood the chemistry that made it work. They could never have explained the science of it. They simply knew, from hard experience passed down through generations, that eating this particular earth allowed them to safely eat foods that would otherwise leave them doubled over in pain. Picture someone gnawing at the bitter end of a tough wild root, then calmly taking a measured bite of pale clay alongside it, exactly the way you might swallow a tablet after a heavy meal. It looks utterly bizarre from the outside, but it was clever, it was careful, and above all, it kept them alive. Strange, as we are learning, does not always mean foolish. Sometimes it simply means they understood something that we have since forgotten. Number 7. They filed and knocked out their own teeth. For us, losing a tooth is a small disaster. We spend enormous amounts of time and money trying to keep our teeth white, straight, healthy, and above all, complete. So it can be genuinely shocking to discover that prehistoric people, in many different cultures all over the world, deliberately and permanently altered their own teeth, very often in ways that were painful, bloody, and impossible to undo. In some communities, perfectly healthy front teeth were knocked clean out of the mouth on purpose, usually at the dramatic moment when a young person crossed the threshold into adulthood. In others, the teeth were patiently chipped, filed, and ground into sharp points, or carved with notches, or filed down flat, transforming an ordinary smile into something deliberately striking and unmistakable. Let me be clear, this was not done by accident, and it was certainly not a punishment. It was decoration, it was identity, and it was a sign of belonging, carved directly and forever into a person's own body. Think for a moment about what a smile like that would announce to everyone who saw it. It marked you out instantly as a fully grown member of your people, no longer a child. It showed at a glance which group, which family, which community you belonged to. And it proved beyond any doubt that you had faced real, deliberate pain and walked through it without flinching. In a world with no writing, no documents, and no clothing as we would recognize it, the human body itself became the canvas on which a person announced exactly who they were. And the teeth were only the beginning of it. The very same logic, the same urge to mark identity onto the flesh, drove prehistoric people to stretch and pierce their earlobes, to deliberately scar their skin in raised, ordered patterns, and to tattoo themselves using soot and sharpened points of bone. We know for an absolute fact that prehistoric people wore tattoos because we have actually recovered some of their bodies, frozen and astonishingly preserved in ice for thousands of years, with the dark inked marks still clearly visible on their ancient leathery skin. So the next time you check your smile in the mirror, remember this. For most of human history, a flawless, untouched natural smile was not the goal at all. A truly impressive, high-status smile was one that had been deliberately and painfully transformed, a permanent, unmistakable badge of who you were, where you belonged, and what you had survived to get there. Number 6. They painted their hands on cave walls by spitting. Deep inside caves scattered across the world, in hidden chambers so dark and so remote that the only way to reach them is to crawl for hours through cold, narrow, twisting passages. There are walls covered in the handprints of people who died tens of thousands of years ago. And the method they used to make these prints is wonderfully, hauntingly strange. They did not simply dip a hand into paint and slap it against the rock. Instead, the artist placed a bare hand flat against the cold stone wall, took a large mouthful of liquid paint, usually a deep red or a charcoal black mixed with spit or water, and then sprayed it forcefully out between their lips, blowing a fine, even mist of color all around their outstretched fingers. When they finally lifted the hand away, a perfect, ghostly outline was left behind, a negative image, the exact shape and size of their hand stenciled onto the wall, framed in a halo of color, and destined to last for hundreds of centuries. Picture the scene as it actually happened. A single person, deep underground, in total blackness, lit only by the flickering, smoking flame of a burning torch or a small bowl of animal fat. They press their open palm to the stone, draw a breath, and exhale a cloud of red mist across their own hand. And then, thousands upon thousands of years later, you can walk into that very same chamber, raise your hand, and place your palm directly over the print, and it fits, finger for finger. These are the actual hands of real individuals, the hands of children, of women, of grown men, reaching out to you across an almost unimaginable gulf of time. Some caves contain hundreds of these stencils, layered and overlapping, a vast, crowded gallery of silent greetings from the deep past. And strangest of all, in some of these caves, a number of the hands are clearly missing fingers, or the tips of fingers. And to this very day, no one is completely certain why. Was it frostbite, ritual sacrifice, a kind of sign language, or something else entirely? We do not fully understand what these prints meant to the people who so carefully made them. Were they signatures, prayers, sacred marks of some ceremony, or simply a person calling out across the ages, saying, "I was here, I existed, I mattered"? Whatever the true reason, they remain among the most haunting, most personal, and most achingly human things our distant ancestors ever left for us to find. Number 5. They covered themselves and their dead in red powder. If you could somehow travel back and visit a prehistoric community, one of the very first things you might notice is the color red. These people were, in a great many places and across enormous spans of time, almost obsessed with a particular substance called red ochre. It is a soft, naturally occurring earth, rich in iron, that can be easily ground down into a brilliant, rusty, blood-red powder, and prehistoric people used it absolutely everywhere in their lives. They smeared it across their skin and worked it into their hair. They mixed it into the paint they used for their breathtaking cave art. They rubbed it onto their finest tools and their most treasured personal objects. And most strikingly and most movingly of all, they used vast quantities of it to bury their dead. Time and time again, archaeologists digging up ancient graves discovered that the body had been completely coated in red ochre, sometimes in such enormous amounts that even after tens of thousands of years, the soil packed around the bones is still stained a deep, vivid, unmistakable red. In some burials, the sheer quantity of powder used is staggering, demanding that the living dig up, transport, and grind down truly huge amounts of the raw earth, all by hand, purely to honor a single person who had died. So why red, and why such effort? We can only ever guess, but the most likely answer lies in what the color red actually represents. Red is the color of blood, and blood is the color of life itself. To completely cover a lifeless, pale body in the vivid color of living blood may well have been an attempt to restore life to it, or to prepare and protect it for some kind of journey into whatever came next, or simply a powerful way of showing how deeply that lost person had been loved, valued, and more. The use of red ochre reaches so far back into the depths of prehistory, and it appears independently in so many widely separated corners of the world, that many experts believe it may be one of the very oldest symbolic behaviors our entire species possesses. Long, long before the first written word, long before the first city, scattered groups of humans across the planet were all reaching instinctively for that same red earth to mark the most important moments of their lives and their deaths. And that tells us something genuinely profound. These were not simple creatures merely going through the blank motions of survival. They held beliefs. They created and understood symbols. They carried within them a sense of meaning and ritual and the sacred that ran every bit as deep as our own does today. Number 4. They cared for the sick and the helpless. Here is something that should permanently change the way you picture the so-called brutal, savage caveman. We tend to imagine prehistoric life as utterly merciless, a harsh world ruled by survival of the fittest, where anyone weak, sick, or injured was simply left behind in the dust to die alone. But the bones, the actual physical evidence pulled from the ground, tell a profoundly different and deeply moving story. Over and over again, in site after site, archaeologists have uncovered the skeletons of prehistoric people who clearly lived for many long years while suffering from terrible, disabling injuries and conditions. The remains of a man whose arm was withered, twisted, and useless from the day he was born. An elderly person who had lost nearly every one of their teeth, and who therefore could not possibly have chewed the tough raw food of the time without serious help. An individual left badly crippled by a broken leg that had healed crooked. Someone who could never have kept pace with a group constantly on the move in search of food. By every cruel and simple rule of raw survival, every one of these people should have died quickly, and yet they did not. Instead, they lived on, in many cases for years, and sometimes for decades. And there is really only one possible explanation for how that could happen. Other people chose to take care of them. Someone went out and brought them food when they could not get it themselves. Someone softened that food, or chewed it first, so that a toothless mouth could swallow it. Someone physically carried them when the group moved camp, or deliberately slowed the entire community down so the injured could keep up or stayed behind at their side. Someone, in other words, looked at a person who could give nothing back and decided that their life was still worth the cost of saving. One especially famous skeleton, that of an older man, was found to have been almost completely disabled, blind in one eye, with a useless withered arm and a damaged leg, and yet he clearly survived into old age in one of the hardest and most dangerous environments imaginable. He could only have done so for one reason. His community flatly refused to abandon him. This is compassion, written directly into bone, reaching us from tens of thousands of years ago. It may well be the least strange entry on this entire list, and at the very same time, it is perhaps the most surprising of them all, because it proves something wonderful. Kindness and mercy, and the care of the weak by the strong, are not some recent modern invention. The deep human instinct to look after one another is every bit as ancient as humanity itself. Number 3. They drilled holes in living people's skulls. Now we move into territory that is genuinely difficult to even imagine. Of all the strange things prehistoric people are known to have done, very few are as shocking as this one, and remarkably, very few are as thoroughly and completely proven. All across the ancient world, in widely scattered cultures that never had any contact with one another, people performed surgery directly on the human skull, cutting, scraping, gouging, or drilling a hole straight through the solid bone of a fully living patient. The practice has a name. It is called trepanation, and it stands as one of the very oldest known surgical operations in the whole of human history. And to be clear, we are absolutely not guessing about any of this. Archaeologists have recovered a great many ancient human skulls bearing neat, smooth, deliberately cut holes. And the truly astonishing detail is what the condition of those holes reveals. Around the edges of a great many of them, the bone has clearly grown back, smooth and rounded and healed, and that single fact tells us something incredible. It means the patient did not die on the table. They survived the operation, in many cases living on for many years afterward, walking around with a hole cut into their head. Now genuinely stop and think about what this surgery actually involved at the time. There was no anesthetic of any kind to dull the unimaginable pain. There were no antibiotics to fight off the deadly infection that should have followed. And there was no real understanding of the soft, vital brain lying just beneath the bone. Someone took a sharpened sliver of flint, or a simple hand drill, and slowly, painstakingly, carefully cut their way through a conscious living person's skull, while that person lay there awake. And astonishingly, it worked often enough that people kept right on doing it, independently, in culture after culture, for many thousands of years. So why on earth would anyone choose to do such a terrifying thing? Some of these operations may well have been medical in nature, a genuine attempt to relieve the dangerous pressure building under the skull after a head injury, or to treat crippling, mysterious headaches and violent seizures. Others were very likely spiritual, a way to release the evil spirits or the sickness that people believed had become trapped inside a suffering person's head. But whatever the reason behind it, the sheer skill on display is remarkable. These were clearly not panicked butchers hacking blindly at bone. They were careful, practiced, experienced, and successful, often enough that their patients survived to grow fresh new bone over the wound. So the very next time you find yourself dreading a routine trip to the dentist, take a moment to remember that thousands of years ago, someone sat perfectly still while another human being slowly opened up their skull. And then, when it was done, simply got up and walked away to heal. Number 2. They buried their dead with flowers and treasure. It is very easy to assume that prehistoric people simply abandoned their dead, or left the bodies where they happened to fall, with no ceremony and no thought. But some of the most touching and unexpected discoveries in the entire history of archaeology show us the exact and beautiful opposite. Our distant ancestors often went to truly extraordinary lengths to honor and remember the people they had lost. In one world-famous cave, scientists carefully excavating an ancient grave found the body of a man who had been laid gently to rest, surrounded by dense clusters of preserved flower pollen. A discovery which led many researchers to believe he had been buried upon a soft bed of wildflowers, deliberately gathered and arranged with care all around his body. Now, whether those particular flowers were truly placed there by grieving human hands or arrived by some accident of nature is still genuinely debated by experts. But other prehistoric burials leave absolutely no room for doubt whatsoever. In one utterly remarkable Ice Age grave, 2 children were laid down to rest side by side, and then covered together with many thousands upon thousands of small beads, each and every one of them painstakingly carved by hand from solid mammoth ivory. Researchers who have studied the grave have carefully estimated that simply manufacturing all of those tiny beads would have demanded many months, and quite possibly several years, of skilled, dedicated human labor. And the children were given still more than that. They were laid to rest with finely made spears, with carved ivory animals, and with other precious treasures, gifts for whatever journey or our afterlife their people firmly believed lay waiting ahead of them. Stop and truly think about what a thing like that actually means. A community already stretched to its absolute limit, fighting every single day just to survive in the merciless cold of an Ice Age world, nevertheless, chose to pour countless hours of irreplaceable labor into beautifully decorating the graves of their dead children. That was not survival. That had nothing to do with survival at all. That was love, and that was grief, and that was a powerful, unshakable belief in something beyond the end of life. These graves tell us, across all the long ages between us, that prehistoric people did not see death as simply a cold and final full stop. They mourned their losses. They lovingly remembered the dead. They believed their lost loved ones were going on somewhere, and they sent them off into it with beauty, with riches, and with overwhelming care. Strip away the tens of thousands of years that stand between us and them, and a grieving parent, honoring a lost child with everything they have to give, is something that we understand instantly and completely. Number 1. They ate their dead and drank from their skulls. And so we arrive at the strangest, and without question, the darkest, custom of them all. As deeply unsettling as it is to sit with, the physical evidence for this one is overwhelming, repeated, and entirely beyond dispute. In many different places, and across many different periods of the prehistoric past, human beings ate other human beings. And in at least a number of well-documented cases, the people being eaten were not enemies or strangers at all. They were the community's own dead. In one now famous cave, archaeologists uncovered human bones that had been treated in precisely exactly the same way as the butchered bones of the animals found lying right beside them in the very same dirt. The human remains had been carefully stripped of their flesh, deliberately cracked wide open to get at the rich, nourishing marrow sealed inside, and covered in the unmistakable cut marks left by sharp stone tools. The people who once lived in that cave had quite clearly processed their own dead using the very same methods and the very same care that they used to prepare a meal. But the single most chilling discovery of all was what those people then did with the skulls. Several of them had been carefully and skillfully shaped, the jagged broken edges deliberately trimmed away and smoothed down, in order to turn the rounded upper dome of a human skull into a cup, a drinking bowl fashioned out of a human head. Now, before you rush to judge these people too harshly, it is important to understand that this was almost certainly not driven by simple hunger, and it was very probably not an act of cruelty or contempt at all. In a surprising number of cultures all around the world, the act of eating the dead was instead an act of profound respect, and even of love. It was understood as a way of keeping a lost relative physically inside you, of taking their remembered strength and spirit into your own living body, of refusing in the most literal way possible to ever fully let them go. To shape a cup from a beloved family member's skull, and then to drink from it, may well have been a tender way of honoring them, of keeping them present and close at every single meal, long, long after their death. It is, to our modern eyes, almost impossible to truly understand. And yet, when you look closely, it springs from the very same deep root as every other entry on this entire list. It comes from a people who thought long and hard about life, about death, and about exactly what the living owe to the dead. These were not mindless, empty brutes. They were us, living in a completely different world, finding their own strange, powerful, and deeply felt answers to the oldest and hardest questions there are. So the very next time you catch yourself imagining the prehistoric caveman as something crude, stupid, and less than fully human, stop and remember, instead, the great homes built from mammoth bone, the healed holes in living skulls, the tiny graves filled with flowers and carved ivory, and the deep, strange, unmistakable love hiding behind. They were, every bit as much as you or I, completely and profoundly human. If you enjoyed this journey into the strange and distant past, please subscribe for more, and tell us down in the comments which of these customs surprised you the most. Until next time.